Welcome to the Advantage Podcast, a monthly unscripted conversation with host David Ashcraft and top leaders impacting our world. Created by pastors for pastors to strengthen our leadership and expand our knowledge and influence.
Well, hey guys, it's fun to have Dan Reiland here with us. And Dan, thank you for joining us on the Advantage Podcast. It's great to talk with you today.
Thank you, David. It's a delight to get to talk with you as well.
So really would love to just find out a little bit more of your background. And I will say real quick, the way I first came across you, late 80s, early 90s, I was listening to John Maxwell a lot. He was at Skyline Church. And I don't know that I ever met you or even heard you speak, but he would constantly talk about Dan Reiland, and his executive pastor. And so that was my first recollection of even hearing your name, which was way back, 30 years ago or so?
Yeah, well, actually 44 now.
Is that what it is? That's amazing.
He and I met 44 years ago when Patty and I got married, and we're coming out of seminary. And yeah, it's a long, and we joke, we're still very close friends, and he's clearly my mentor, and we talk a lot and are together when we can be. But sometimes on those stories, I feel like I tease him. I say, John, on a lot of those illustrations and in your books, I feel like the south end of a northbound horse, we just laugh. But it's a rich history. He is just wonderful, and those were very formative years.
I'm sure they were.
Very formative years, yeah.
So, Dan, if you went to seminary, and where'd you go to school then?
Asbury.
So if you went to seminary, you weren't probably thinking about being an executive pastor, or were you? Were you thinking you were going to be a senior pastor? What were your thoughts at that time?
I was thinking I was going to be, actually, going back, my undergraduate work was in criminal justice administration.
Interesting.
And I was a private investigator for a year.
Okay.
And I had a call in my life. I was always involved in the church younger. And that's another long story of how that happens, kind of a God thing for sure. But God interrupted, and I kind of ran from it all and just went into my own field as a private investigator. But God said, that's not the work I have for you, and ended up going on to seminary. And I don't think I remember your question at that point, but in seminary at Asbury. And I know. And yes, I was planning on being a senior pastor. And I should tell you a quick story, I think. Well, I'll tell you a short version of a longer story.
Yeah, no, that's fun to hear.
So yeah, there was a thing at Skyline where if you went to seminary, if you were one of the preacher boys selected by Orville Butcher, the founding pastor, and I was one of the 27 preacher boys that he put his hand on. And of course, off I went, and he was like, no, to be a private investigator, but got back on track, went to Asbury. And the deal was you got to return to Skyline to be an intern.
Okay.
So I was John's second intern, and my claim to fame is that I broke John Maxwell's internship, because after me, he closed it down and never did it again.
Is that right? That's funny.
That was that bad.
So that was the Pastor Butcher that he would always talk about in his enjoy tapes, and okay, it's fun to go back that far.
Yes, indeed. So, but the redemption to the story is that at the conclusion of that, he also invited me on staff, and that launched our lives together.
So did you start out as an executive pastor, or were you a staff pastor with a different role and then kind of morphed into that?
Staff pastor for several years, spiritual formation kinds of things, lay ministry involvement, men's ministry, just pretty much anything except creative arts. Can't sing, can't do any of that stuff. Then after a season, he said, I think I need you to step up and lead the whole team. And so that's what launched us into that direction. And that was a learning curve. You sit beside John Maxwell and you pretend to be the executive pastor, when you don't know what you're doing. But,
well, and I would imagine too, back then, that was a newer role, right? There weren't a lot of churches with executive pastors, because what I remember, Dan, is in the earlier days, or I say earlier, back early for you and me, that pastors would hire an associate pastor, and they would call him an associate pastor. And in essence, that was the executive pastor back then. But so a newer role for you then.
It was a new role for all of us. We were amongst the first group. There's a couple of articles written of the first group, and apparently I was in it. And actually, I love this because it's the only time now I'm ever considered young, but I was the young guy in the group. It was Paul Selhammer with, Chuck Swindoll and that whole crew in Southern California. And so we were actually just making it up. As a matter of fact, we couldn't really figure out exactly what I was to do for a year and a half. And so I finally said, John, why don't we do this? Why don't we decide what your job is, and then I'll do everything else.
That's good.
And that worked.
That's good. Well, that's funny because that's what I often say an associate pastor. I will tell you a bias real quick, Dan. I feel like sometimes now senior pastors are too quick to hire an executive pastor, or for a long time they were too quick to hire an associate pastor because I felt like what they were doing is they would take whatever they liked, they kept it themselves, and then anything they didn't want to do, they would give to this associate pastor. And I think there's definitely a time and a place for that, but sometimes I feel like that happens too soon. So anyway, that's one of my biases. But I also realize personalities matter. And so there's certain things that I'd love to do that I wouldn't want to let go that somebody else may not. And so it changes the timing, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think there's even sizes of church financially that makes sense. And when you start, and the reason that you bring on an exec pastor, and now of course it's been around so long, there's all different kinds of executive pastors.
Right.
Two main themes: more administrative, and then the one that's more ministry leadership development. That's the one I lived out for all these years,
Okay.
and I'm still having a blast. I finished at 12 stone after 24 years, and I'm blessed to still be involved. They've invited me back to continue teaching and coaching leadership on the staff, not on staff, but with them. And as a matter of fact, Wednesday I'm with all the campus pastors for a couple of hours of leadership development,
That's great.
and so that's fun, fun, fun. But I'm pretty full time with coaching and consulting at this point.
Are you? Okay,
Yeah.
good. And you're enjoying doing that, and that's
Oh,
keeping you plenty
having a
busy.
blast.
Good.
Having a
That's
blast.
great. Good for you.
Yeah.
So let me go back to the exec pastor position for a moment.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there's two different types. You mentioned sizes of churches. So when is the right time for a church to consider hiring an executive pastor?
Well, again, personalities, and I don't want to say there's one that's wrong, but I can say there's some that are more ideal. It's about 1,000 to 1,200 that's the
Okay.
more ideal.
Yeah.
And the reason is financially, it's difficult. I'm just go practical if that's okay.
Yes. No, that's totally fine.
Yeah. On a financial realm, it's very difficult to hire somebody who's going to be the quality of staff person that you need at a smaller church. And as a matter of fact, 800, 1,000, 1,200, even at that size, the executive pastor is probably going to have at least one ministry portfolio that he would or she would own, like small groups or ushers
Yeah.
and greeters or something. It's almost 1,800 before all you do is lead development, the staffing, all ministry design and architecture. You're about that far beforehand. I'll
Yeah.
tell you something that's interesting that happens over and over and over as I get to coach churches and exec pastors and senior pastors is you'll hire someone early, and so they're doing both halves. 500, 600, 300. They're doing administrative stuff and ministry stuff. And then it comes time where the church has grown, it's bigger, and it's time for the exec pastor to choose what side they want. They always choose the ministry side.
Really interesting.
And yet many of them are gifted for the administrative side. And then it becomes a tough choice.
Yeah.
Now it's like, well, but you're really good over here. I know, but I want to do this one. And so those are kind of like some of the people things that get tricky more than just finance.
Yeah.
But it can be done. It is done. It's just a little bit more of a risk.
Now, why do they tend to choose the ministry side? They just enjoy more of the people aspect of the ministry side, or do you know why they choose that more often than not?
Um, you want me to be candid about it?
Yes, I'd love to. Yeah.
I think it's just the more appealing side. They feel like that's the more important side, and
Okay.
they feel like that's the side that they want to be on, where both of them are extremely important.
Exactly.
I partnered with, Kevin, myself, and Norwood Davis. Norwood Davis is a genius. I mean, we would have never survived without his skills and abilities and the finance and buildings and all that he did. And so it's not a who's better, it's a partnership.
Right.
But sometimes, we see things. It's kind of like when you're asking, did I see myself as a senior pastor or an executive pastor? And in the transition from, well, there was a little in between time between Skyline and 12 Stone. And those were the Enjoy years. Remember cassette tapes?
Totally remember that. Yeah. So
And
Dan, I would listen to those tapes all the time and would be excited to get them. That and Bill Hybels and his defining moments. We'd take them on vacation every year in the car, and the kids would always go, "Oh, did John and Bill have to go with us again on this trip?" Because they grew up listening to those tapes as well. So yeah, those were very formative years.
very formative. And so in those in between years, I was at North Point, and I served as an elder on the board, and
Okay.
I learned a lot there with Andy and the team, and I learned a lot. And and it was, interesting. I love the church. I love the local church, and it began to stir within me to go back. I mean, we were in churches all the time. That's all we did. But it was stir with me to go back to a church. And so John and I would talk. He said, "No, we're doing this together, Daniel." And then finally got to the point where, okay, you can, but we still got to stay close. You got to stay around, and so he and I would walk and talk in his backyard, and here's what the bottom line was. Uh, that 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 he said, Dan, you would be a really good senior pastor.
Mm.
You might be a great senior pastor. But he said you were born to be an executive pastor,
Mm.
and you're called and gifted for that. My wife would say the same thing, and I'm going, no, I did it with you. I'm done with all that. But there's something about self-awareness and being honest about who you are, and being honest in your gifting, and enjoying being who you are. And when you give yourself permission to do that, God just opens up amazing doors and amazing possibilities when you get comfortable with you. And as I matured and got comfortable with me, God just really allowed cool things to happen.
That's good. That's great. So when you were there at North Point, were you doing coaching and consulting, or you were working with Enjoy and that was your primary job, so to speak,
Oh,
during
yeah.
that time when you between Skyline and 12
Yeah,
Stones?
yeah, yeah. No, I wasn't coaching.
Doing that then. Okay.
No, I mean, sorry, I wasn't coaching North Point. They didn't
Right.
need, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. You were just a member there and
I
on the
was a
board
member
serving
there,
there. Yeah.
serving their board, doing a small group, but
Yeah.
all my coaching, consulting, teaching, writing was with Enjoy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Very good. So let me go back to just a little longer on the executive pastor. You mentioned two different types, administrative and then ministry leadership. It's fun to hear you say 1800 or so is the time to do that. When at LCBC, we hired our first person to serve as an executive team member at around 2000, 2100. He was a ex-banker, or was a banker when we hired him. And so he came in, did finances, but kind of initially we had him kind of doing everything, which was way too much. And then as we kept growing, we hired a second and then kind of on from there. But when that person comes on, depending maybe on their strength set, depending on the senior pastor's strength set, that really defines what it is or what the role is in that situation, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're kind of picking one of those two big lanes, but then inside of the big lane, it's what are their gifts? What are their abilities? What's their
Yeah,
experience? And they can pick up, there's no straitjacket. It's kind of
right.
designed it according to the person. And some will, you can, I love really, really large churches too, because they'll have some of the funkiest org charts and crooked lines and going where, and you say, well, why is your administrative XP over the children's department? Because it works.
Yeah,
Because it
exactly.
works. So yeah, but it's almost up in that 1800 before that's really just what they're doing.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good. And so, talk a little bit. You talked about funky lines in some of the bigger churches, and I'll listen to people talk as though there is one very strong way that it always has to happen, and the lines have to be very clear as to who reports to who. But it sounds like you're okay with what works, and it may be different in every situation.
Absolutely. I've seen a gazillion org charts,
I'm
and some of them
sure.
are very entertaining. And some of them, they build them, put them on the wall, but no one ever looks at them.
Right.
Some of them get hung up about who's at what level. And of course, that's not the point of an org chart. But I think we have to give ourselves permission for the org chart to serve the organization, not us serve the org chart.
That's
And
good.
and it's just it's really a tool for communication. It's a tool for how the system works. And yeah, if for example, let's go here for a second. I always start the org chart idea with the personality and wiring of the senior pastor,
Okay.
because if he If he many of them, I want one XP. I don't want to fool around with all that stuff. I'm not doing that thing. I want one, and that's how we're going to do it. And others, no, I really like a team. But then the team ones, they'll had to want four or five or six or seven, and that's, in my opinion, a little too big because they really can't tend to all that with reviews and development and one-on-ones and all that stuff and do their job. I
Right.
try to get the team guys down to about three or four,
Okay.
and the guys who want one, we try to build executive team meetings. So if you just have one who kind of help run the whole thing, um, there's at least a collaborative spirit with a group that they're talking with.
Right.
And I think after a while, most churches, 10,000, 12, if they get really, really big, then one it starts to be the bottleneck. I
Yeah.
think Kevin and I experienced a bottleneck. Bottleneck for me is not some big ethereal kind of thing. It's a very simple definition. A bottleneck is simply when the top leaders in the organization are preventing everybody else on the team from running at full speed.
That's good.
They're waiting on us. We can't make decisions fast enough. Yeah, we're just stopping up the system. And when it gets that large, or any size, where the top leaders are bottling up because they can't get to it, it's time to change the structure.
Yeah, that's good. And Dan, for me, it was the concern about a bottleneck. It was also my strong bias is a team as opposed to one, and
Right?
my reason for that is bottleneck, but also my reason was maybe style and preference. Of if one person was going to make the decision of the style or direction of the church, I'd rather it be me than an executive pastor. If somebody was going to be a bottleneck, I'd rather I be the bottleneck than somebody else. And so I would always choose to say, let's go with a team. So you mentioned three or four positions on a team. What would those positions ideally be? And I realize it's changing all the time. And you mentioned the structure has to change. And I think we at LCBC changed structures probably 7 or 8 times in my 32 years there. So constantly evolving. But in a setting, so let's say you've got 2 or 3 thousand people in your church. How many would you have on that team if you were going to go with a team, and what might the positions be?
Yeah. I think if there was just a classic design of a team, there's probably three people, and those three people are the administrative leader,
Okay.
who call them, today we probably call them director of ops, so the administrative person there, they got finance and office and buildings and IT and structure and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the creative, the production, the arts, worship, that whole realm, media, sometimes communication, although that can be a specialty. And then kind of in the center is the executive pastor, who is over the ministries, all of staffing, over leadership development. Those three, that's sort of a classic
And
design.
where does finance fit in on that one then? Is that
Finance, I'm sorry, would be on the administrative director of ops.
That'd be the upside? Yeah. Okay. All right. Interesting.
Yeah.
And then the senior pastor, typically in that classic model, is he the one leading that meeting,
He
or
would.
is the executive pastor doing that?
Well, it depends again on the personalities. I mean, the executive pastor might, that's a good question. It depends on when you say leading it. I think the senior pastor is leading the meeting because of their
Right.
presence, right?
Right. Right.
So they get to speak whenever and all that. But I'm glad you stopped there, because I think the executive pastor does bring the agenda
Okay.
and gets all that gathered, gets that prepared, and then the senior pastor can add to it anytime he wants, obviously.
Or hijack it whenever they want. Probably that
Hijack it
happens
or
a lot
whatever it might
too.
be, and
Yeah.
you have to get relaxed, about you have to get really relaxed about how far you get through the agenda.
Yeah.
When I get to sit down with XPs, I'll always tell about the top three skill traits, very unique skills to any of the most successful XPs I've ever worked with. And one of them, the first one, is the ability to handle all authority and no authority at the same time. That's just
That's good.
understanding the principle of the throttle, being strong enough to lead, but not being so hungry you have to take over.
That's good. So, how did you respond? I mean, you were working with strong leaders. So, you were there with John, you were there with Kevin at 12 Stone. And so, I would imagine, I used the word hijacked a few moments ago, but I would imagine that there were times where you were headed clearly in one direction, and either John or Kevin or somebody would come in and change course. And so, how did you respond to that? Would that frustrate you? Would you talk to them? Or what was your response when course correction was happening that you hadn't really been aware of, or it just happened suddenly?
Well, honestly, uh, they just didn't do that.
Is that right? Okay,
It,
interesting.
they really didn't. They were both extraordinary in two ways. One was, they both have so much charisma and they're big personalities that they just walk by, and I called it the Maxwell morphine. The touch of the hem of his garment. So much charisma
Yeah,
that he'll just bless and anoint things in the hallway, and off they go. And
right.
you just wait, John, no, And so what we learned was, of course, you can talk to the pastor, but he always directed the staff back to me for decisions.
Okay.
And so with both of them, honestly, we just always talked first, where there was just no daylight. And with Kevin, there were really three of us. It was Norwood, Kevin, and myself. And we just always kept communication tight and strong. There was really, we were very, very blessed that Kevin is in the more recent one, that as different as our personalities are, he's fast cars, fast motorcycles, go, go, go. And I don't have a need for that at all. I'm more collecting fine guitars, so we couldn't be different.
Hmm.
But our ministry philosophy and how God brought us together is so similar that it just wasn't any difference. Probably the only difference that we had, which sometimes before we were sat in the room, we had to come to agreement, was financially.
Hmm.
Because he is a bet the farm, push all the chips back in, no looking back, high risk dude.
Hmm.
And I'm over there going, "Whoa, easy, big fella," you know. So I'm way more conservative on the financial realm. But here's what we learned is that if he was like, push all the chips in, and I was going, I'm not sure. Typically, we would say, well, he would tell himself, I better back off a little. And I would tell myself, I better step up a little
Okay.
because we knew our extremes.
Right.
And he would come in and he would say, he's very convincing and he's a great visionary and full of energy and all. And he would, pitch this thing and he would say, now, Daniel, change my mind, influence me, talk to me.
And he wanted you to do that, I'm sure,
He
to
did.
help him see what flaws were in his system or
He
his
did.
ideas. And yeah.
He did. Yeah.
And he was expecting you to do that too. So he wasn't looking for you to sugarcoat things, or he probably really wanted you to be honest with him.
No. And so did John. He wanted me to be honest with him. And
And that's right, part of your responsibility too. They were trusting you to kind of rein them in if they needed to be reined in.
they were counting on it. John would often say, Dan, don't tell me about when the bus, if you, don't tell me the bus is going to go over the cliff after the bus has gone over the cliff.
Yeah.
He said, I want you to tell me what you see. And Kevin did something. He put something in the water culturally on the staff early on that was just beautiful. And he calls it MVS, Mutual Voluntary Submission. Have you ever heard him talk about
I have
this?
not. No.
I think it's the way larger churches grow and survive and work from 1,000 and up easy, even 800 and up, but MVS is mutual voluntary submission. And the quickest way I can describe it, I can tell we can do an hour talk on it, but the quick way is, he was the boss. He was my boss. He could tell me what to do. He clearly saw what I did in my list of responsibilities and could govern my time, all that kind of stuff. And in 24 years, he never treated me that way once,
Hmm.
ever.
Hmm.
It was a team. It was a Lewis and Clark. Mutual voluntary submission is bowing to each other for the sake of the organization
Okay.
rather than bowing up for
Okay.
our own agendas.
Right.
And when that's in the water, it's amazing how it works.
Yeah. That's cool. That's cool. So you worked with two strong leaders, and I don't know that most people would one be in two scenarios that way, or maybe they were in two because a new pastor comes into the situation. But how was it working with two different leaders? How did you have to adapt to Kevin after working with John? Is that very challenging? I'm sure it's got to be challenging, but it's probably exciting in some ways too. So talk about how does an executive pastor adapt when there's a leadership change that way in a church?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you have to figure out the picture of the relationship. And so for John and I, the picture of the relationship was always clear, still is today, even though we're long, fast friends. It was always a Paul and a Timothy.
Okay.
And so that's how the relationship operated. That was the picture. It wasn't something we announced to the staff, but it was really obvious to the staff. It was Paul and Timothy. And when you sort of see, this is how it works, you have a picture. And you don't have to write out all the bullets and all the thing. That's the picture. For Kevin and I, it was very, very different.
Mm.
And we figured it out pretty quickly. It was a Lewis and Clark. And where we came together, each, had equal skills in different ways, and we brought them to the table, and we were both kind of going off the map. We had no clue. We had never done it before. We didn't know what we were doing. This was like a wild thing out of control, and there's no turning back. And so it was a different era, a different story. But the picture of the relationship really helps.
Well, and I would have to think you were at a different place in your career in both of those environments. So with John, you're just getting started, so he can kind
Yes,
of mold you, shape you
he did.
to whatever he thinks is appropriate. With Kevin, you come in already with a reputation. You've been with John, and so he's bringing you in part because of that reputation. And so, how was it different when you were working with John as opposed to Kevin? I mean, you talked about those two, Lewis and Clark, and Paul and Timothy, but how was it different for you? How did you experience it differently?
Well, I think there are two big things. First of all, as a young leader, I carried a lot of insecurities that I had to work through and try to figure out.
Sure.
And then, of course, sitting beside John Maxwell, that didn't help it. Although his belief in me actually did. That's what picked me up and pushed me through, where he
Okay.
saw stuff that I didn't see. And I think there's a really big difference between um, being invited in as the executive pastor and rising up from the team. And now
Mm.
you're all buddies on the team, and now you're over the team.
Right.
That's a complicated thing for a young guy who doesn't know what he's doing, you know?
Yeah.
But then John and I had to practice too, because, well, he set the table and I'm at the table. Who are they going to look at, right?
Right.
So we just had to learn how to do that, and he's wonderful. And he because strong leaders don't want to be put in a box. They don't want to be caged. They don't want to be told. They don't want to hear about why it won't work. They just
Right.
let's go make it happen. And so
Right.
let's go do it. But with Kevin, there was a sort of recognition. One of the board members, is my prayer partner, Charlie Wetzel, John's long-term writer. I think 95 books now.
Wow.
Uh, and Carter said, "Well, there's a new sheriff in town." So it was, it was a different feel,
Right.
but I had learned that by that point, it's like we all know, it's not me anyway. It's God's. If God's called you and God's gifted you, it's not about me. It's about Him anyway.
Right.
So, and besides, I still make tons of mistakes, and keeps me quite humble. Like, did I really just say that?
That's good. So, excuse me. So, talk about, Dan, when you were at Skyline and you're put into the position of being executive pastor. I would imagine there were other people on staff that maybe thought they should have been the executive pastor. So, how does a senior pastor help this rising executive pastor function well? What did John do, or what did you wish that he had done to help you succeed in that role? Because I would imagine a lot of our guys that are listening are either considering having an executive pastor, they've got one, but they're trying to figure out how to continue to help them and build them and develop them. And so, what were some key things for you as you were starting out?
So that's a really wonderful question. As I was starting out, I think one of the things well, first of all, we just figured out the roles and expectations and the picture of the relationship. So with that foundation set, I think publicly, he never ever corrected me publicly, or
Mm.
contradicted me in the meeting, or in some way just cut me off at the pass, or we're not doing that,
Okay.
ever, 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 ever. But flip side, he was a wonderful coach with great candor and honesty on the other side. Um, you have a minute, I can tell you one of the first early stories, because
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
sometimes a story is better than 16 points. But
Right.
I remember when I said my claim to fame is I broke John Maxwell's internship.
Yes.
So at that same moment, though, he invited me. You'll remember this old-fashioned term. Maybe you will. I don't know. But remember Christian education?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So he invited me to oversee all of Christian education, all the adult classes, all the teach kids. And so about a month in, so I was an intern for a year, and about a month into, now I'm a real pastor, right? And I got my first report card out of seminary about a year and a month in, and it was 4 words from the director, the volunteer director of uh, actually it was a children's leader, it was, and it was 4 words, is we don't like him.
Is that right?
Yes, and I
So
thought,
how do you respond to that anyway?
just like, yeah, well, and of course they got to him really quick, and so he sat down and he said, I'll never forget this. Was about 1982. He said, Dano, it's obvious to me that you really love people. You have a deep heart and a deep passion for people, but you're really lousy at communicating that. They don't know.
Mm,
They don't know. And if you don't learn how to get that, what's in your heart, out
mm,
to other people, you're probably not going to make it in ministry.
mm,
And we had a candid talk, and he said, I don't know if it's the first time he ever said it, but I know it wasn't in any books yet. In '82, he said, Dan, people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care.
mm,
And it changed my life.
mm.
He said, Dan, you run up and down the hallways with that dumb little briefcase, and you're just trying to save the world and win the world and build the church. He said, you're running right by the church. They're called people, and so that just changed my life. And we wouldn't be having this conversation today if he didn't have that and several other conversations along the way. But let me tell you the end of the story. That's enough of that story. There's certainly more to it. Oh, I should say this. That whole conversation lasted 10 minutes.
Is that right?
The coaching process is we overcomplicate it. My favorite definition of a good coach's action is just pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you'll just pay attention to the people around you, you'll have the right word for the right person in the right moment.
I love that.
A lot of XPs and senior pastors that I get to coach will say, how am I supposed to coach my staff members every week, in my one-to-ones? I said, well, you
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
Most of those meetings you're just doing stuff. It's stuff, it's ministry stuff. But if you
Hey,
pay,
Dan, can I just say I love that because, again, I think so often we think it's got to be formal. If somebody's my mentor, my coach, then we've got to have plan time set aside that we're going to sit for 30 minutes and my mentor is going to somehow mentor me. Where for me, it never worked that way. It's exactly what you said. It's always in the hallway or somebody steps into somebody else's office real quick for a couple of minutes and you say what you need to say and you talk about it and then you move on. But it's not the planned necessarily one-on-ones all the time. So I love that. I think that's a great thing.
yeah, yeah. But you got to pay attention and then have the courage to say it and then have the wisdom to say it correctly.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, anyway, enough of that. But
You were going to go on with the story. You said there was another side to that
oh
story
yeah,
that,
thank you, thank you,
yeah.
thank you. So yeah, they jumping way ahead. Years later, Patty and I, my wife and I, were on vacation, and we were down somewhere in Mexico or something, and on the beach, and I got a phone call from Marty, this person that I got that report card from years
Okay.
years earlier. Like, we don't like him.
Yeah.
And today, of course, John is very, very generous with his words about Dano's the most, relational leader I know and stuff like that. But I got a phone call, and she said 2 words. She said, "Kirch is gone." 3 words, I guess. Kirch is gone. Her husband,
Hmm.
Kirch is gone, and he had this tragic, horrible accident. He was underneath a trailer, and it fell off the pilings and crushed him.
Wow.
And she said, "I need you here." And Patty, sorry, this gets to me, that Patty and I just jumped in the car and drove back, and to be the first person she would call
Yeah.
after she said, I don't even like him, is the power of transformation. It's why I love leadership development. It's why I give my life to do what I do. It's John saw something in me and poured his heart into me and still does. And I was so transformed that I was the first call. How could that be? It wasn't me. I'm just this goofball ex semi hippie from Southern California in the '60s, kid in the '60s. And years later, I was part of a wedding when God gave her another person. And so, anyway, I don't know why I'm doing all that. Just kind of came out. But there's a leadership development's a powerful opportunity. It's a gift from God. It's part of legacy. It's how, you know, if you have a vision big enough and bold enough that you can't do it by yourself and you can't do it without God, you need more and better leaders.
Right. Exactly.
And who's going to do that?
Exactly. And then my experience, a lot of times pastors don't want to take the time to develop their leaders. They hope to somehow be able to import them from someplace else, and they're already developed and fully ready to run. And yet that has not ever been my experience, both either because we couldn't financially afford to import those people, or even if you did, they weren't what you thought they were going to be. And so it's almost easier to just go ahead and develop them, coach them up like you're describing. So I think that's really exciting. And would you say that's part of the responsibility of a senior pastor is to coach up, whether it's that executive pastor, whoever's on their team, they've got to develop them.
Absolutely have to. And there's a difference between equipping and developing. It's a real important difference. I don't want to get too techie in the weeds,
No,
but
but I'd love to hear the difference in the two.
yeah, but it's huge. Equipping is training your team, volunteers and staff, but let's stay focused on staff. It's a little bit more of an intense level. But equipping is training them to do specific ministry tasks.
Okay.
So how do you, recruiting? How do you do, training them to do a certain thing? Developing is pouring into them so they become a bigger, better, stronger person. Equipping is based on the organization's agenda. Developing is based on the person's agenda.
Okay.
Equipping is a transaction. I'll train you how to do this. You do this. Development's more of a transformation. It's a gift. And so I'm giving this to you. So, we love it with the volunteer leaders because of the development. They're the ones that get promotions and raises, and they lead their family better. We try to say make 80% of your illustrations not about the church when you're doing leadership talks with volunteers. Make it about leading their home family better, leading their community better, leading better in their jobs, and just raise them up as a human being, spiritual leader.
That's great.
And of course with the staff. But so there's a big difference. Now, is there a blend and blur between equipping and developing? Of course there are. But it's just, and call them whatever term you like. Some people like to say training and developing, but training for me is the overarching word over the two. But just making sure that you have both. Here's what I've learned. You can build a great church, a large church with equipping, but the legacy churches, the multiplying, the ones that just do something really big, know how to develop. Throw in one more thought, and just cut me off because I'll start going.
No, I love what you're saying. This is great stuff. Thank you.
It is, at 12 Stone, for example, I hope this isn't overly blunt, but you just can't get hired if you can't equip. That's just a table stakes. You have to have equip. Now we'll show you how to do it better.
Right.
That's table stakes. But developing is an art, and honestly, not everybody can develop well.
Right.
That's an art, and there's some things that distinguish somebody. So the more developers you have on your team, the better. But everyone should be able to equip.
So would you use the word multiplying along with developing as part of developing that ability to multiply and develop others as well? Or is that a whole separate category for you?
No, it's not automatic. For example, when we'll have, most of our model would be based on a, group. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, in a group for leadership development, get a book, pick a group, pick a group, all that kind of thing, and ask you questions. It is not automatic nor assumed, nor would I ever recommend it at all. Now, all of you go get a group and do it. I would never say that.
Interesting.
Because not everybody can do that. They can all go equip and we can elevate their leadership, but they can't all develop other leaders. But
interesting.
I would also, on the other hand, be looking for one or two from that group who had that gifting, that art, that nuance, that read the room vibe, who could raise up other leaders.
So you'd see developing as being a more difficult skill than equipping, that a lot of people can equip because, again, if I remember your terminology, it's more equipping is giving you the skills necessary to be in charge of this role or to serve in this role, whereas developing is, you said it's more that personal side and helping that person become more, you're raising the leadership capacity of that person in all areas, not just that one skill level or skill set. So,
Yeah. And I don't know that I would say it's more difficult, but I would say it's more artful and nuanced.
okay,
Read the room, pay attention to the thing. I can give you a really simple model with quick points on
sure.
what that looks like. But let me say first, a really quick one-step test for who might be, probably, maybe might be a good developer. And that's the man or the woman who can go get their own group.
Hmm. Hmm.
If you have to give them a group, they might struggle.
Yeah, interesting.
If they can go say, hey, we're going to meet once a month for 5 months. We're going to go through this book together. We're going to do leadership, have some good coffee. And the person's going, count me in. But if you do that and you go, let's meet once a month and we're going to do this and we're going to go through a book and we're going to talk leadership. And the individual goes, what are we going to do? Who's going to be in this room? How often? That person might struggle.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Oh,
You,
that's good. That's great stuff. Yeah.
yeah, you have to be kind of drawn. Yeah. Um, Sorry, I
No,
get.
no, I love that. I think that's great stuff. And I think that's a challenge of every pastor. And I don't know that I've ever heard that distinction necessarily, or even saying that some people have that ability, some don't. So I think that's fun to, I don't know if it's fun to hear that, but that's good for us to hear that. So let me
Well,
ask you one. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, because I don't want to leave it like some can't do it. Because I love to say about leadership development is leadership development's a lot like prayer.
Okay.
Hard to do it wrong,
Okay.
but there are some. It's like take you and I. You're a great communicator, senior pastor. You have some abilities that I don't have. Now, can I stand on the stage and give a sermon and do a good job? Yeah. Can I do it like you? No. That's all I'm saying. I don't want anybody
Right.
that they
Yeah.
can't develop, but
Right.
there are some who just have a more natural gifting for it.
Yeah,
But it's
that's good.
really hard to do it wrong.
Well, we may need to pull you into the advantage at some point here and do a session for us on helping everybody understand what are some of those skills or traits that it takes to develop, because I think that's huge. That's key. So fun to hear that. Can I ask you one other question before we end here? Do you see any trends happening in churches? You've been at 12 Stone, you said 24 years. You're out, you're coaching now. Any trends that are coming up that would be good for us to be aware of? Or do things seem to be somewhat stable in the church world right now? What do you see going on in churches?
Well, wow, that's a wonderful question. There's another podcast.
I'm sure, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, one thing I'm very encouraged about is we're seeing church growth.
Yes.
We're seeing people say yes to Jesus. We're seeing baptisms. We're seeing young adults come in. We're seeing movements, as you would know, in colleges across the country. So that's good. On the other side, I think we're seeing such a rapid, rapid, rapid change in culture. It's very difficult to keep up. We have a residency at 12 Stone. We've had 30 residents, 2 years with us after college, raising them up, part of the pipeline, so to speak, to staff leadership. And out of the 141 full FTE at 12 Stone, 39 of them came from the residency.
Okay. All right.
And so you get the idea there. But when I get to talk or teach the residents or do have a little one-on-one cup of coffee with them, they often ask, what's the one thing I should work on? I think right now the greatest challenge for our young leaders coming up in the church is learning to interpret the culture.
Hmm.
The culture is changing. It's always been interesting, but it's changing so fast that if a young leader doesn't know how to interpret what's happening, then we don't know how to communicate.
Right.
And so we're trying to communicate the gospel to a culture that we don't understand their language and what they're thinking because it's so polarized and divided. And we don't know what they're thinking and they don't know what we're saying.
Yeah.
And so the communicator on the stage really needs to be able to interpret culture, whether it's one-on-one or communicating to your 500 people in your church,
Right.
is understand culture. I think that's a really,
It's
really
good.
big thing. Anyways,
Yeah.
I'll stop there. But
No, that's good. That's good. Fun talking to you, Dan. I can't imagine you seem incredibly relational now, and so it's hard to imagine what you were back in the early '80s and somebody said they didn't like you. But God has definitely used you in many ways, in great ways. And so appreciate you and what you're doing today, but what you've done over the many years. And thank you for speaking into to our Advantage guys. Appreciate it so much.
Well, man, this has been fun. Maybe we get to do it again. Sorry if I got going a little too fast, but it's just a joy to talk with you. And I pray God continues to bless your ministry. You know, that what I hear from pastors like John Swartz and others that and Pat, it's really a God thing what he's doing with you. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, so much. And have a good day today. Appreciate
All
you.
right. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you for listening to the Advantage Podcast with David Ashcraft and for participating in our goal to strengthen and encourage pastors and their churches so more people are introduced to Jesus across Pennsylvania. If you found this helpful, feel free to pass it along. To find out more about the work of The Advantage, visit our website at theadvantage.org.